Hi, it's Joe Glines, and we're having another one of these AutoHotkey Expert interviews today. I'm fortunate to have Charlie Simmons or slash Tank from the forums. And actually, Charlie, we talked, what was it, like a year ago, maybe, about RPA in general.
Yep.
And I don't think I mentioned this to you because I don't remember if we had any side conversations, but like I learned an amazing amount from a lot of your posts, to yours and Jethro's, on the whole web scraping stuff. When I first started learning object-oriented programming, that's what I started on, was web scraping. And both your guys' stuff was like, it was hard because I was learning it from the forum, but I never would have got to where I was if it wasn't there. So thank you for, it's so amazing to me that so many people put in a lot of time in the forum in helping people. It's one of the things I love about AutoHotkey is that forum stuff. But anyway, so thank you for all your past work on that. And obviously you still do stuff. Why don't you go ahead and give a background about who you are, your background in the automation industry, because you actually do this for a living, and the tools you're using.
Sure. Well, I'm Charlie Simmons. I'm also known as Tank on the forums. So I have been doing automation now going on 10 years with a variety of tools, not just AutoHotkey. So I have a varied experience, mostly AutoHotkey at Bank of America, automating everything from call center applications to risk and compliance tools. So most recently, we have been using another tool called Automation Anywhere in my current consulting roles to automate things like SAP, which is an ERP that's used all over the place. So I've been consulting now going on 2 years. It has consulting is going from client to client and standing up their automation environment and doing their first couple of automations for them. It's a lot of fun, but it's definitely challenging to always be new to a business. Whereas at Bank of America, I was always familiar with the business. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool. And I don't. Well, it doesn't matter. I was going to say, I'm trying to remember if I remember from the forum post. But do you have a background in programming?
Not before AutoHotkey.
Okay. Wow.
It was a hobby.
Uh-huh.
Programming was a hobby for me up until then.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where you would comment on stuff that I would write in your knowledge of, like, just using JavaScript or the DOM. And that was what, for me, I was trying to learn AutoHotkey, but both of those other things, especially the DOM, like I couldn't go find a book that talked about the DOM straight away of, like, here's the things. It was always, in conjunction with JavaScript or some other language. But you seemed very well knowledgeable in that area.
Yeah, so I had been hobby developing web applications for a couple of years before I started with AutoHotkey.
Okay.
And doing some VBS as well. So I had a little bit of a multi-flavored programming experience, but it wasn't professional. So it was an easy transition because I knew I had learned how to automate some things that, for instance, attachmate from which is a mainframe emulator with both JavaScript and VBScript. And it was an easy transition into AutoHotkey with them. The thing that people get hooked up on is that DOM, much like COM programming, is universal across languages. And so once you know DOM, or you know a particular COM interface for an application, you know it for all languages. You just have to learn the syntax of that language.
Yeah.
And so a document object is a document object in VBS, just like it is in AutoHotkey.
Yeah.
And that I think is where people get hung up a lot. They don't quite follow why I keep referring to articles in the MSDN.
Yeah.
They don't quite, instead of, well, why is it not documented on AutoHotkey? Because it's not an AutoHotkey thing.
Right.
This is a universal construct that you can apply any language to. And I think that has been the biggest hurdle to get past whenever I was trying to show people how to do things.
Yeah. I try, when people come to me for web scraping help, I tell them, study the DOM, because it just, the more you know the DOM, the easier everything becomes. And I know a fraction of it, right? But it's just like, I learn more and more. I'll watch there's little stuff I'll pick up. I'm like, holy cow, I didn't realize you could, access things this way or jump to this thing or whatever. It's amazing how much is there. It's just, I have one or two courses on, but they're not straight on the DOM, but they, of course, like you said, they use the DOM to teach you things, but it's in it. It's not about it. And that was the other really confusing thing to me, of like, it's this backbone thing that is there, but it's not some, I guess it is from Microsoft originally. It's a Microsoft document object model, right? Module?
No, actually it's a Mozilla.
Oh, is it? That's funny.
Yeah. Mozilla dropped JavaScript on the world. EMC, whatever, ECMA, ECMA, which is the underlying programming language behind JavaScript, and which is an OS-based language in Unix.
Huh. That explains a lot, though, because I remember, I forget what sort of site I was on, but it kept referencing to where did you just say that that it was originally from? Mozilla. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. It must be a little different, but it didn't dawn on me that they were actually the initial source of it all. Yeah, and that
and so Microsoft came out with this flavor of JavaScript called JScript, which was actually a little different in syntax for Internet Explorer. And eventually they came together and we're doing the same things. So if you really want to understand JavaScript better, you go to ECMA, and we're on ECMA 6 now. It doesn't evolve quickly. It's 20 or 30 years old now, and it is only on version 6.
Wow.
So let that sink in. Whereas we're on version 50 something of Chrome. I think
it's higher even. Yeah, I thought it was in the 70s even, or maybe it's 57.
Might be. I haven't looked in a while.
Yeah.
Version 11 of Internet Explorer, and that's 20 some odd years old.
Right.
So ECMA hasn't evolved a lot because it's robust, but it started in Unix. It got turned into a web tool by Mozilla with one of the first browsers, and that's how it started. So now the whole DOM thing, there used to be a lot of good articles on it all over the place. You could search for DHTML, dynamic HTML, and find all kinds of material on it. Seems to be buried a lot more now. Part of other things, not something you can read about directly, which is sad. Because it really is. What do you use JavaScript for in a web application? To manipulate the web page, which you need DOM for. So it's sad that it's buried and not really a direct study material anymore. But it used to be. It used to be.
Let's shift back to was it Automate Anywhere? Is that the
Automation Anywhere is a formal RPA tool. There is Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, Work Fusion, UiPath. There are others, but those are the big names in the industry. What differentiates them in particular from tools like AutoHotkey and AutoIt and VBScript and things like that is this concept of a control room, credential lockers, the ability to separate developer roles from administrators. This is what separates them. Functionally, your scripting languages have more capability.
Mm-hmm. It's I remember from our chat last time, because you said almost, or maybe everything you do with it, your tool, it's done with a GUI, like drop down and logic and laid out. Is that right?
Yeah, you drag and drop commands onto the screen, just like in Visual Studio when you're working with the control toolbox.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
You just drag and drop controls to it, and then you assign a couple of properties to it, and you're done. Like there's this command called object cloning where you click to capture, you select the window title and you from the available open windows, and you click this capture button, you drag your mouse over the object, it highlights, and you let it go, and it has captured details about the object for you. So it's easy to use. You don't necessarily have to know anything to manipulate a web page in that regard, but it has a lot of limitations. And I will give you an example.
Yeah.
So I was automating a web page, and one of the criteria set out by the business was for this web form, wait until the submit button is enabled.
Yeah.
Okay, that seems pretty basic, pretty simple.
Yeah.
But there was no way within Automation Anywhere to test if a button is enabled. There was a way to test if there was a class called enabled, but not if the enabled attribute of a button was assigned.
Yeah.
And or the disabled button, rather, the attribute, because it's disabled.
Right.
But there was no way to test this. And I had to revert to image recognition to solve the problem. And so, which is kind of hit and miss once you move across environments and resolutions. And so this is something we ran into. It's a limitation. There are other limitations that are even more severe when you start dealing with ODBC databases or SAP or trying to think here. My brain's going blank. A Java-based applet. So the Java bridge doesn't work very well with Automation Anywhere. So anyway,
and it comes with a hefty price tag as well, right?
It does come with a hefty price tag. So in return for being able to be rather ignorant about the applications that you're automating, you're going to pay $10,000 per license on average. Some consulting firms charge more than that on behalf of Automation Anywhere. Automation Anywhere in particular charges $10,000 per license. And the recommended setup is to have a dev environment, a UAT environment, and a production environment. That's 3 licenses just to create one robot.
Wow.
Okay. And I can only run one robot at a time. Whereas with AutoHotkey, I can run separate automations at a time, so long as they're not interfering with each other.
Yeah.
So there are, you get what you pay for, I guess. The ability for, say, a business analyst to create an automation that has no programming background, but it is a hefty price tag. Well, and even so, within the RPA industry, using RPA tools with an average licensing cost across all of them in the range of $10,000, we still see an 800% return.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that gets back to which I would say was the size of the companies, and also apparently, let's say no, maybe it does. It's not inferred, but the I was thinking about the volume that you must be dealing with also, but it's more I think about the size of the company alone is going to be you're dealing with big companies.
Yeah, so you're looking typically at a Fortune 100 company, maybe a few Fortune 50s, which generally means the mid to large corporate America. And they've got the money to just throw around, right? And in my mind, it's the wrong segment of the business population to target. I would argue that the smaller corporations have more to gain from automation. They typically have worse tools in their back office to work with. They are typically doing more swivel chair operations, and swivel chair operations are taking data from one or more applications and typing it into another one. That is a swivel chair. That is, I'm literally copying and pasting, and or from Excel, for instance, and we're doing a ton of that. And this is the basic business model we target: is Excel from or to an application. And most of our automations will fit into that.
Yeah.
So your smaller businesses will typically have a lot more of that in their payroll, in their inventory, in their billing cycles, and they're being completely overlooked, and big corporations are gaining the benefit. I just got done doing one where it was creating business quotes in SAP for a major hotel supplier, and they process 100 quotes a day. Okay, so in terms of volume, right, 100 quotes a day. I imagine a smaller organization that was working harder on sales could generate 100 quotes a day. But we targeted this bigger one when we went to sell the product because they have more money to throw around. But a smaller corporation could go an AutoHotkey route for free for the cost of labor. And a talented programmer and really make some headway and some traction.
Well, I would even argue you could do it, just say get someone that's not even that talented like me. Like I said, I am no good programmer. I'm okay, right? But like when I worked in corporate world, I did so much of that swivel chair that you're just describing, right? It was ridiculous, the stuff that I'd see people doing, or I did it, and I said, "There's no way I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna automate it somehow. I'm gonna find a way to make it easier." And even if I didn't automate it fully, but I just I could hit a button and it would transfer, and I could examine it quickly. Right? Like to me, like that was easy. I could do it in a couple hours, right? And get something close. And then I manually review it instead of, back and forth and back and forth. It was just crazy. And yeah, the time savings was amazing. Yeah. There's a lot to be gained there. So why do you think especially like, let's I'm trying to think if we should talk about the bigger corporate world, which is, we worked in different fields there, but that's where I did most of my career in, versus smaller companies. But in the corporate world, I literally would have bosses tell me not to automate stuff. Actually, you know what? Let's take a step back before I go there, because you on the side note, you brought up a couple good questions of like, well, what are the arguments for automating in the first place, right? Obviously, there's one about saving money, right? Which is what often will get people to get interested, which is, you were mentioning that earlier, right? But there are a lot of other benefits, right, that you get from automating things. What are some that come to mind for you?
Well, so I want to clarify. When we talk about monetary savings, we're talking about FTE reduction, full-time employee reduction.
Okay.
It is an unfortunate side effect, but this is where the money is.
Yeah.
The other benefits are error reduction, because when you have human beings do data entry for any reason, they mistype a certain percentage of data, no matter how good they are.
Well, and even then, the more repetitive a thing is, I think the more likely that you start having errors because you just stop paying attention. Right?
Whereas an automation is going to do it the same way every time. It's going to send the same keystrokes. It's going to send the same data that it captured, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So error reduction has its own cost benefits, because you pay a certain amount of money to handle those errors whenever they come back to your business, right? That's a labor cost.
Yep.
And it could be a litigation cost depending on the nature of the error.
Right.
So this is a big one that can't be overlooked. And then we get into the smoother running operations. Your business process will necessarily change once you automate something where you used to have two different departments, both compiling and delivering data. You may reduce that to one area that's doing both. You have one person instead of 20 doing a particular job and delivering all of the data, and all they're doing is monitoring and handling exceptions to the process.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a much more streamlined business process. You don't have to move data through email or through shared drives so that another group can process it and wait on that lag time. So that reduced lag time in just delivery of data is a big benefit. And that could be a benefit for your customer, not necessarily for your workforce. Your customer could be waiting on something. And that was the big driver for automating these quotes, because it took forever for people to enter the data into SAP and deliver quotes back. So that was the driver for them to automate doing quotes. The final benefit, of course, is for that one or two employees that you keep doing a job to handle exceptions. Their work is more brain power. Their work is easier, in fact, because they're not doing the same repetitive tasks, and all they really have to do is monitor the process. They feel better because out of all of the many, they've been selected to continue on. Their place is secure in the world. So you end up with a happier, the ones that you keep and repurpose for this end up being happier than they were to start with. And that's a non-tangible goal, benefit. But I think it's an important one. There is another way to gain benefit from automation that is less easy to predict and be tangible. But instead of doing staff reduction, let's say your goal is to ramp up volume.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to scale employees at the same rate you scale your volume. So you pick your high risk areas and you automate those, knowing that you're going to have some idle employees at first. But as you ramp up volume, those employees start handling exceptions, and your volume gets taken care of by this streamlined process.
Right.
In fact, there is a company that I'm interviewing with right now that is their actual goal. And it's one of the reasons why I'm continuing to interview with them, because they're not after staff reductions, and I don't like staff reductions.
Yeah. The other thing I would throw in, which you alluded to earlier, but there's tracking and reporting type things that before, if things were done manually, it wasn't easy to log things, right? To easily get some reports.
You have no log with a user.
Yeah. And then the other, I'm curious because you've done this a lot. I've done it for my own things at work, and every once in a while I had my managers, let me help other groups, but it was mostly automating my job. But it forced me to really think about what I did and really streamline. Even if I didn't even automate it, it helped me gather a better understanding of all the wheels that were in place in the process, and it just made me get better organized. And then I'd say the other one was just because, of course, I'm using AutoHotkey for it. Whatever I automated, even though I always thought this is a one-time thing, it never was, because I would always repurpose what I wrote later in some other way, right? And it was like, wow, I'm learning my skills, but at the same time, it was easy to think that like, oh, it's only for this one thing. Yet I got to repurpose it over and over, so many times.
Well, when you think about it, all automation is based around two concepts: data extraction and data entry.
Yeah.
And really, the only thing that changes are the names of the applications.
Yeah.
It really is a repurposing of the same logic. Once you write logic to determine if something is actually a person's name versus a house number, for example, that bit of code is useful everywhere you're ever going to do that. That's it may feel like one time, but it's not.
Yeah. Well, that's where I started realizing, like you said, that I did it all in SPSS because that's my background is in statistics. But I would have I would geocode things, and the data was crap that I would get from. This is when I was working at Brinks, and they had all this address data, and it was so junky that I wrote a ton of stuff because I'm like, well, I'm gonna be able to reuse this over and over on any address to clean them up, and yeah, it in the long run it saved me a ton of time. I invested quite a bit of time at the beginning to get it to to clean it up, but boy, I got to repurpose it a lot.
Yeah, data sanitation is the big gain with automation and error handling. You reduce your errors because you sanitize your data, you validate it, you don't make mistakes because you can validate it uniformly. It is impossible to do with a human being effectively. It is one of those few things that an automation can do that a human being just can't.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think more managers don't actually look for people? Because I know, like I said, you worked at Bank of America, right? And obviously big corporate, giant. I'm curious if you had the same experience, but it was really rare where I had a couple bosses that loved what I did, but on average, I don't know if it was they didn't understand it or they were afraid of it, but it was definitely not something that they were trying to hire people that had that skill set or emphasize.
Well, sorry, I got the dogs here.
Yep.
I got the parrot dog here who likes to sit on my anyway, so it's both. It's fear and lack of understanding. Lack of understanding about the financial benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Fear because a lot of people are absolutely convinced that automation is going to somehow break an application.
I've never written that one down, but you're spot on there. That I do remember hearing that.
It is absolute fear, and they don't want to get in trouble with the IT department over breaking applications.
Yeah.
And then you get into the IT department's objections, which is governance. They have no control over this rogue IT shop that they've got in the middle, and the trick is to incorporate it into IT. And let them see a proper development path and testing and promotion to production and separation of duties. These governance rules that IT likes to maintain for their own programming projects. You have to figure out a way to comply and live in that world. And you have to convince them that you will. So, and that's where the ignorance comes in. Not knowing how to make this fit into all of these jigsaw puzzle pieces. How do I ensure that we're not going to break anything? How do I fit into the IT structure? Because it has to.
Yeah.
And how do I prove the financial benefit? You know, these are the things that stop businesses from wanting to automate. These are the things that good consulting firms walk in the door and start on immediately, is this sales pitch of financial benefit fitting into the IT infrastructure and FTE reduction. This is where we start in every conversation when we walk into the door for RPA. And I think if more of us at a low level, at a private level, working in our own little cubicles, could find a way to approach this conversation in this way, we would gain a lot more traction.
And I'm curious, so especially like when you were actually in the corporate world, working next to your colleagues that didn't work with AutoHotkey, but did you try to teach other people were they interested? Did you ever go down that path of?
A lot of them weren't interested. And they saw me getting to do fun work, and of course got to reap the benefits of my fun work. But they didn't want to get involved. We very few. So we had a call center for some 300 people. We only had one person show any interest in becoming part of the team. We had something like 150 people in our onboarding department. 2 people showed interest. So very, very low percentage of people showed any interest in being part of this. And I think would-be amateur developers, because that's who we're talking about most of the time with AutoHotkey, are very intimidated by the idea of doing this for a company, because they're afraid of the pressure that comes with this job. And you know what I'm talking about because you've done it. You've had the manager standing over your shoulder wanting to see progress, right? It's intimidating. And of course they saw that too in me. They saw VPs and managers coming and standing over my shoulder wanting to see the latest version of what I was working on. And
it's interesting. Some people would view that as a negative, right? And others, I'd be like, look, I mean, I'm getting the attention, I'm getting the love, right? It's a good thing, not a bad thing.
And that's the way I chose to look at it as well. And but it is quite intimidating to a lot of people who are amateur coders who lack frankly the self-confidence to approach the subject.
You know, I never thought about self-confidence in that relationship, but now that we're talking about it, I could see how that might be it. Because I've always been, I'll figure it out, right? I know that I know I'm not the best, but I'll figure out how to make it work, right? I know that, so that was never a question in my mind. And by the way, so approximately how long ago did you start using AutoHotkey?
2007.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. And then I think you mentioned it was like a hobby thing. What got you into? Why did you find it in the first?
Hobby programming in general. So it was. I always had a passing interest in computer technology. I was a restaurant manager. So.
Yeah, you use a lot of computers. I know, just for tracking a lot of stuff, right?
But I had a passing interest, so I'd go home at night and tinker with trying to build web pages that weren't just HTML. I found PHP, found databases. found JavaScript. I started learning how to make these applications. I used to still have a copy of the first website I ever built, which is still, to me, an impressive achievement, given what I knew at the time. It would still hold up as a good application, although not very secure, because I didn't know anything about security at the time. But it looked good and it worked perfectly. And luckily for me, nobody ever tried to hack it.
Yeah.
But it was a hobby. It was something to do. I was playing Brood War. I'll tell you what it was. I was playing StarCraft Brood War, and had started a gaming clan, and I wanted a web page for all of us, so we could talk and communicate with each other offline, and know who was ranked as leaders and who was ranked as Joe Schmo, and So I wanted a web page for that, something that people could sign up on and participate outside of the game. And that was what started my journey on it. And then we decided to have a kid, and I decided to leave the restaurant industry. So I started working on a support help desk.
Oh boy.
And did that for a couple of years. But while there, I started making my own tools with VBA and VB script to help me in my job. This got noticed in live call monitoring, of course, and I had people approach me with their fears about me breaking applications and getting IT to come down on us. And I'm like, no, this is only doing, we've all had this conversation. This is only doing what a user can do.
Right.
Right. If I can break this application, so can everybody on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So you have those but you have to show it to them and stuff. At some point, they finally, they saw this a little bit, and they found themselves with a use case of their own. We were selling off a portion of the business, and we had to extract data from a mainframe into Excel as part of this deal. We had to extract terminal settings, and there was no clean way to do that. It would have been a bunch of users copying and pasting data into Excel and then merging those spreadsheets, or we could see if this guy we've seen making tools with VBA can do it. So I said, okay, fine. Give me a training room full of computers where I can sit in the middle of them and watch them run, and I will automate this data extraction for you. And so they did. They jumped off the bridge with that because they saw the financial savings of not paying a bunch of people to do it. They can pay just me, or they can pay a bunch of people to do it. That was their selling point. From there, they started looking for other use cases. Someone else in boarding suggested using AutoHotkey for it. Not me. I was introduced to AutoHotkey by someone else. I was using VBA for all of my automation. So it just morphed from there into a big AutoHotkey operation.
And you mentioned VBA, PHP, and JavaScript at least, and maybe some other ones. But how does AutoHotkey shine compared to those?
Shine.
What's its strengths?
Mouse moves, mouse activity. You can't do with any of those. That's one. You get to work with files a lot easier. You get to manipulate strings a bit easier. String manipulation is a bit easier.
That was one when I was learning Python, like their slicing of strings was amazing. It was so easy. I'm envious in that one on Python. But yeah, it still is not hard.
There are a lot of people out there who will argue that the flexibility of the syntax of the language is a place where it shines. I personally disagree with this.
Yeah.
I would like to see AutoHotkey become a much stricter language.
Yeah. Have you used AutoIt?
I have tinkered with AutoIt, but it is everything people complain about. It is bulkier. It is a little slower, and but it has some.
It's a little more locked down, isn't it? Or at least
it comes. So the big thing with AutoIt that I think AutoHotkey could learn something from is shipping with user libraries. When you download AutoIt, you get a bunch of user libraries.
Yeah.
And libraries for things like automating browsers.
Yeah.
Libraries for automating spreadsheets. Things that make the programming journey, the entry cost from a learning standpoint easier.
Yeah.
And that is something that AutoHotkey could learn something from.
Yeah.
I've never approached this conversation with Steve Lexicos, but it is something that one of these days we need to approach and
having, which I think we've done a little bit now, but having a default editor also, right? Just to say, here, by the way, here's a recommended editor, or at least here's 3, right? That like you can.
We used to do a better job at that. We used to come with setup scripts for 6 or 7 of the primary editors that were out there. It used to ship with those, and it would set up your editor for using AutoHotkey.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere along the lines, as Lexicos took over, we got away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was something that Chris was big on. So that has been a shortcoming of Lexicos to get away from that.
I'm not knocking the work anybody does because it's all on their own time, right? So I'm like, hey, the minute I start putting in all those hours, yeah, I'll at least have some way to say something. But yeah, I'm grateful.
Well, I'm not knocking him. I'm just pointing out that this is a place where we started falling short as this transition occurred.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Better support of editors is something we're sorely missing.
It's one that and I think there are some people who are they're more like they're programmers, and so they'll say I just use Notepad, and for them it's okay because they're programmers, and it doesn't really help them nearly as much as when you're a noob. Wow, having that IntelliSense, and being able to see color code and like I switched over from Sight to AutoHotkey Studio now. And there's a lot of built-in stuff in there that I'm like, wow, it's so much easier to program. It's night and day. And yet you don't have to be advanced to use it, right? It just helps me be more productive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something, you going from Visual Studio your whole professional life to really any of our editors is crippling.
Yeah, when you're used to some of the, I've used, it's been a few years, but I was amazed at some. I've used a couple other pretty powerful ones as well, and some of the things again. But as with anything, right? The more functionality they have, the more harder it is to learn it, right? It's to do some of the stuff, and that's where I think both Sight and Studio. I haven't used Notepad++, but I think it's the same way of like, no matter your skill level, you can start it and it makes sense. It's easy. But some of those other ones, like when I go to just publish something or pull in a library, and it's great if you understand it, but it's a learning curve.
Yeah, it really is.
What would you say the drawbacks of AutoHotkey are? I guess you alluded some to the, you want to lock down the language some or something.
Yeah, the language is a little loose for me. I think it breeds errors to have 7 or 8 different ways to write an if statement.
Yeah, that's in Python. There's like one way to do something, and there's that way. And at first, I found it really. I felt like it was limited, but I realized, wow, this is the one way. I learned one way, and I'm done. Right? I see the value in that now.
Yeah. Well, that is the beauty of Python.
Yeah.
There is Python is one of those rare languages where there actually is a right way to do everything.
Yeah.
Whereas the right way for most languages is, does it work?
Yeah. Right.
But Python is so strict that there is actually a right way to do anything, and I think that once you get past the learning curve of the syntax, and you have to indent, and once you get past that learning curve, there becomes an ease of use. Because, using a tool like idle, for instance, you get to see what happens with your code as you write it. And it's very intuitive to see where you're going wrong, when you're going wrong, and where you're going right. Whereas anything else, you have to compile and run, whatever. So it's different. When you have a strict lockdown language like Python, you have one learning curve, and that is the language and syntax. And then after that, it becomes much easier to figure out what to do.
But what I was going to say is, go ahead, finish your thought.
In AutoHotkey, you go through the form and you see 6 very different looking ways of doing something, and you're not really sure you're looking at the same thing because they look so different.
Yeah.
When in fact they are the same thing.
Yeah.
Do I quote this string? Do I not quote this string? I mean, do I use percent signs around the variable or not? I don't know. I'm confused, right? Why on the left side of the operand do I not put the percent signs, whereas on the right side I put the percent signs? When there's no parentheses. Why do the parentheses matter?
And then we're in a loop, right? When it's just one line, I don't need the brackets. But if it's more than one line, then like for people who've never seen this, like I don't understand. That's a loop. It's 2 lines, but there's no brackets. Well, you can, which I like.
But you can use a comma. You can use a comma to get lines without a bracket.
Does that on Mike? He writes stuff for me. I pay him to do some stuff, and he moves it all up into one line. And for me, I'm like, I get it. I'm fine with it, but I have, in order to read it, I need to break it out because I just can't see it like that.
Well, there's another prime example. I can use a comma instead of brackets to do multiple lines.
Yeah.
But it's very confusing to look at. And I think it hurts the learning experience quite a bit. But anyway, another weakness that I think it has, even now, is still arrays. We don't yet have array sorting and filtering and searching. A lot of useful data tools that we have in other languages. We have sort of classes, but not really. And those are still kind of confusing to anyone coming from another language. Because they don't really work like classes in say C#. So we don't have things like private and public and protected and friends with, and you know.
I want to take a step back though, because I thought it was interesting is you mentioned one of the things that we had gotten away from was or never had that AutoHot does with is coming with some libraries to do certain functionality. And yet when I switched to Python, you talk about coming with nothing. Like you download Python, but then like it like does almost nothing until you get, you know, all these different, and that was to me, AutoHotkey actually, and I guess it's just because you're using mostly the Windows API to connect to Windows, and Windows has the functionality, right? It's not necessarily an AutoHotkey, but I definitely see your point of like because I think the two you mentioned, web scraping and Excel, are two. Those are actually two I feature a lot on my website and talk to, because at work I used them all the time and I learned how to do those. Granted, there's 8 million things you can do with AutoHotkey, but those are two huge ones that, especially, well, and then the third one would be the APIs, which to me are just the funnest, amazing, cool thing in the planet as far as I'm concerned, because like you can connect with any web service, you know, and send data you want so easily. What I would love to have is it's not AutoHotkey, it's the overall industry, right? Or is the OAuth 2 authentication like nailed down to where it's not everyone is different on everything I go to. But yeah, I think it's interesting that we could prioritize and come up with, maybe it's 5 libraries, right? The things that are used most often, or at least make them have links to them, even if they don't come with it, right? Just have them there and show them, by the way, here's the main things people are doing with it.
Yeah. I've started working on, in the background, a script showcase and some of the old user libraries that we have archived, available via web page again, but that's slow going because I have limited amounts of time. But it's something that we need to get back to.
I wonder, because my background, at least the last 8 years when I was at TI is where I was working full time. I moved from market research, which was my background in statistics, into the internet marketing group doing email stuff. But I did a lot of basically drip campaigns, or, you know, things where it's an onboarding process where you get an email, you know, with this, and there's another one like a week later. I wonder if we could, maybe if we have an easy way to sign up for that, but an onboarding to AutoHotkey. So, hey, here, which is one of my questions for you, was like, where do you recommend people start if they don't come from a programming background at all and they step into AutoHotkey? Do you recommend like hotkeys and hot strings to start? Is that the typical like easiest low hanging fruit?
No,
No?
that's not where I would start. In fact, it's I think it has the least to do with the rest of the things that you can do with AutoHotkey.
Agreed. I'll agree to that. Yeah.
I would actually say start with loops and manipulating directories of files. You know, it is a common thing to need to rename files with dates in them. It is a common thing to have to migrate files from one place to another. It is a common thing to have to read DAT files and text files and INIs. Start there.
Yeah.
I would say, because you'll get to learn how to handle basic logic in the process and do some basic things that are relatively easy and straightforward. After that, I would start playing with a GUI.
Whoa, yeah. That was and I when I first started learning GUIs, I tried them in AutoHotkey and I thought, oh, AutoHotkey is so simple, yet okay, their GUI syntax, all right, that's not as easy. And then when I started to switch to Python and I was learning Python, and every person I would talk to at Python, actually, I used to go to these meetup groups that had like 60 people, right? And the vast majority of people where I one-on-one talked to them, I had at least 10 people, all of them were aware and at one point had used AutoHotkey, which blew me away. that like people would be, it's that known about, and yet they stop using it, you know, which surprised me, because I still thought it's the Swiss Army knife, right? It has a lot of things you can do with it.
Well, you have to remember that a lot of these folks' introduction to AutoHotkey was prior to COM being built.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
Okay, so their perception of its usefulness was very limited.
Yeah. But where I was going with also, because I would ask them for help with Python with doing GUIs. They're like, oh, I don't do GUIs. GUIs are they're much different. They're a whole different animal. And then after a couple of years, when I came back and started working with Maestriath, and he builds GUIs like there's no tomorrow. But I learned a little bit more about GUIs and realized GUIs it's not the language, it's just GUIs are very different, right? And how you set them up and the workflow. And so I was slamming AutoHotkey when I shouldn't have been, because they got a lot of built-in easy stuff it is pretty easy to deal with.
Yeah, Visual Studio spoils you on GUIs.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. You get this toolbox, you drag and drop controls, you get a property window, and you double click a control and write code that's attached to it. Yeah.
And it handles the whole that there's different places where people can come in and keep track of what's getting submitted and where. I mean, that's the stuff to me that it
well, that's where you write your code at.
Okay.
But so if I want to say what happens when I click this button, I just double click the button and I go to the code for clicking the button.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It starts with a beginner function, button click, right?
Yeah.
Button click, right?
Yeah.
And you just tell it what you want it to do. I don't have to do a GUI submit, no hide. I don't have to,
Wow.
Try to figure out what's what. I have syntax highlighting for what variables are available to me and everything.
Yeah.
Spoils you. Whereas you're right, GUIs for just about any other language are quite painful.
And then I'm curious. So now, do you use AutoHotkey regularly?
I still use AutoHotkey. I used it most recently in a project where we were converting some existing VB scripts to Automation Anywhere, and part of the process was writing out flowcharts for the existing automation.
Mm-hmm.
So I used regex patterns to take the VB code and convert it to plain English. So where it may have window dot control whatever dot click, right? He would automatically convert when I pasted to click on this button, the submit button.
Cool. Yeah.
Right. And it was just a bunch of regex examining, what was in the clipboard. So I still use it. I use it for automatically entering usernames and passwords and applications. There are aspects of Automation Anywhere that I don't particularly care for. An example would be it's common in a dialogue to, when you push enter for it to submit it, be the equivalent of clicking OK.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case with Automation Anywhere, so I wrote scripting to make that happen because that's my habit, and I wanted to support my habit instead of changing my habit.
Yeah.
As an example, there's other things like that's in Automation Anywhere that I don't care for, that I write scripts to manipulate how it behaves. So yeah, I still use it. I still use it, and I don't think it'll ever not be useful to me, which is why I continue to support the community, because even today, I find it useful.
Cool. Well, and again, thank you for your time supporting the community, because It's I don't know how people do it. I mean, yeah, it takes a special kind of person that can hang in there with people that I should say always, I'm pretty sure 99% of the time, if I'm going to ask a question there, I do my homework and get my ducks in a row, and, you know, and can usually be pretty clear about what I'm doing. But like the amount of people that will just say, hey, this doesn't work, you know, and you're like, all right, what doesn't, you know, can someone write me a script to do this? And you're like, I don't even know what program you're talking about, let alone like what it is. And it's just the amount of, anyway, people just don't spend time to, you know, formulate their questions. Who was it? Someone said the other day, and I'm like, it said it was a long question gets a short answer, and a short question requires a long answer. And I'm like, that's brilliantly stated, because yeah, if you take your time, you know, other people, you could answer my question so concisely if I've laid everything out right and been very specific, versus I asked this crazy short question about something, and it just, there's so much work they're expecting you to do. Yeah, I don't know how the people that support the forum do it. So thank you.
Well, you have to get a certain amount of don't care. And honestly, I know I'm not the only one who does it, but I look at a question, and if it's just so bad,
yeah,
I go on to the next thing. And
which you really have to.
I'm not going to waste my time on the really bad ones.
Yeah,
they're gonna try harder at some point, or they're going to give up.
Well, I was going to say, because otherwise you teach them that asking bad questions is okay, and that someone will be.
I'm not a fan of that. And I know that there are some moderators that will try to figure it out with them, but I'm not one of those. Ask me a good question, or don't ask me at all.
Yeah.
The exception to that is if it's just such a common problem that you ask about, that the answer is obvious. And I will give you an example. Somebody must have been 3 or 4 weeks ago, asked a question, you know, why doesn't my GUI use the value I type in? Something to that effect.
Yeah.
Didn't post any code. It was like one sentence.
Yeah.
How do you figure this out? Well, the thing is that used to be a very common question, and the problem is they're missing GUI submit in their label, and so I told him to put that in his label for the control, and he came back and said, "Yep, that was it." And
yeah,
you know, it's that is the exception where I will answer a bad question. 9 times out of 10, I want you to post your code. I want a lot of detail.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd even say, well, and that it takes some time, right? But I will take what I have out of because most of my stuff is small anyway, but I'll have, let's say, 300 lines, and I'll compartmentalize it and even refactor where this is my question, right? It's not all of this stuff. Because sometimes, of course, you need it all, but more often than not, you just need this little bit to say, this is what I'm working on. This doesn't work. But yeah, it's that, and I have a hotkey that'll launch, and it searches the forum, Stack Overflow, and I think I had a couple others when I was doing SQL stuff, but it automatically first, so I can type in my search and just Google. It uses Google, I should have said, to search the forum and search Stack Overflow to say, has this been asked before? Because that's the stuff that I'm like, really? Like, people don't even bother to search once yet to see if someone's asked this question? That's insane.
No, because there's so much that comes back that too becomes intimidating to the noob.
Well,
how do I sort this out?
Yeah. When I forget what you mentioned earlier, but it made me laugh, because when I first started learning object-oriented programming, and really I used hot strings and hotkeys with AutoHotkey for the first like 3 years or so that I used AutoHotkey, and it helped me be much more efficient, right? I'm not going to kid you. I'm like, I thought I was amazing, and I was, because compared to everyone else, I was still so much faster at what I was doing. But then I switched into internet marketing and started doing web scraping and all this other stuff. And it blew my mind that like AutoHotkey does so much more. But that was at that point in time, that was when we had just switched over to the AutoHotkey L and incorporated the COM. That's what it was. And of course the web scraping before, that was where I saw you had I forget what, iWeb, is that what it's called? Something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. I had developed a library and I never really bothered to redevelop a library. Well, I have. There's one on GitHub for it, an update to it. But because web scraping now is so much easier.
So much easier.
That needing a library seems a little silly, but there are things that are useful, like functions to set text on a DOM element. You know, you don't have to know whether or not it's a form element or something else to set text, because there's a function that will figure that out for you.
Cool.
You know, going across frames, if you know the frame name.
Oh God, yeah. In my video I say, like, if you're trying to get this and nothing's coming back, I said, look at the tool and see if you have frames, and then if you do, cry a little, because like the first time I was dealing with them, I can't tell you how many hours I spent like working through and even now I can do them, but they're still takes me a little bit of time to figure out the exact right frame and address.
They're painful to me.
Okay, good. All right, yeah. But anyway, you said something earlier. It's like when you get search back and you're like, is this even? Oh, there was the multiple ways to do stuff in AutoHotkey, and you're like, is this even the same language? And that was when I was doing those searches, and some would come back with the original AutoHotkey syntax for dealing with COM, and then some of the new ones. At the time, none of it, was I was aware of any of it. So it was so confusing to me at first. Of just, it was a really bad time to be learning AutoHotkey for doing that, because now those are mostly gone.
Luckily, with the new forum, we don't have a lot of those versions of answers anymore.
Yeah, agreed.
But I know what you mean. For a while, it was very confusing.
Yeah. So actually, my last, at least, question that just popped in my head was, how do you feel about the name AutoHotkey alone? Do you think that prevents AutoHotkey from getting more attention? No. I don't. I don't think it plays a role at all. I don't think. I don't think, all of my time at Bank of America, they ever once asked me what language I'm using. Wow. Okay.
Any manager.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. Yeah.
8 years of going to different departments, and not once did they say, well, what language are you using?
Yeah.
They don't care. They just want it to work.
Yeah.
They want you to do your magic and to make it work. And of course, I would tell them what it was, but they never asked.
Yeah.
So I don't think the name plays a role in any way, shape, or form. The folks using Automation Anywhere are only aware of the name Automation Anywhere because they paid so much money for it. They don't much care what the name is.
That's a good point.
To them, it's they picked it because within the U.S., Automation Anywhere has the biggest footprint. It's the most common tool, it's most widely supported. They pick it because of that, not because of the name.
Mm-hmm. And actually, on Automation Anywhere, I'm curious. Do you recommend people who are into AutoHotkey, if they just like the overall process of automating jobs, would you recommend they? It doesn't even have to be an Automation Anywhere, but that they look for a role like that type of a company in doing it? Is it something you?
I think so. So we're starving for talent, absolutely starving. And there are 6-figure jobs all over the place. for anyone. The
Wow.
hard part is understanding the way of thinking necessary to do automation, which is different from typical programming. Knowing that, it's easy to pick up automation anywhere. It's easy, and they will all train you. Every one of these companies will train you in automation anywhere.
Wow.
They're looking for talent that knows something about automation. And I didn't know automation anywhere when I got hired.
Really? Wow. That's
right?
awesome.
They didn't care.
Wow.
Right. They cared that I had some experience doing some automation. I understood that process.
Concepts. Yeah.
The concept of sending keystrokes to an application or grabbing an element off of a web page and manipulating it. They cared that I knew that. They cared that I knew that the thought of an application had to do with a user interface versus a back-end system.
Yeah.
They cared that I was familiar with that way of thinking. And I would encourage anyone who uses AutoHotkey a lot to just go for it.
Wow, cool. That's good to know. I didn't realize, I mean, I know it's growing like crazy, right? And I'm sure that's just going to grow even more. But yeah, I didn't realize that I didn't realize you didn't know the language at all when you started there, right? I mean, that's like actually when I started in the IT group at TI, granted they knew me, right? So they knew I wasn't a complete crazy person, but I didn't know. I told them, like, I don't know any SQL. We were using SQL and business objects. We're doing queries and stuff. I'm like, I know data. Don't get me wrong. I've spent my life in it, but actually writing SQL queries, I know nothing about SQL. And they still, brought me in just more because they knew me and knew I'd figure it out. But that was what actually I'd used AutoHotkey a lot for, is automating my SQL templates and my joins to certain tables and queries, and writing, like, if I had a SQL query where I'd have 100 things I had to search for with an in list thing, I could highlight them all and hit a button, and it would comma quote wrap them into an in list query. And I'm like, oh my God, like, there's so many people that could use this because they're all doing the same thing as me, and they're manually going and building that. And I'm like, this is done in a half a second, and it's done automatically. It uppercased them, it deduped them, it made it so easy. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it's often overlooked, and that's where a lot of IT people have used AutoHotkey is for stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they think of it as more of a support tool and less of a primary tool.
Yeah.
You need business users to think of it as a primary tool.
I think it's a very valid point. You need people like that, was because I actually did the work, right? And I saw it from a whole different light than people in the IT group who they're used to the back end and they don't understand what we do. And also, I think they would, if they literally sat and shadowed somebody for a day, they would shriek in like agony of how people use computers, right? Like I know I do. It's just amazing to me that people, I look at it as like, I learned how to, even in SPSS and statistical language, program in syntax and macros, because I was too lazy to do everything manually, with the GUI. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm doing the same thing over and over. And I just taught myself. Actually, I did have some classes in it, but yeah, it astounds me that people just don't invest a little bit in themselves. Have you heard the story of the guy walking through the forest, and he sees these two guys cutting down a tree, and they're working hard and cutting, and the guy says, "Hey, have you stopped to sharpen the saw?" And they're like, "Oh, we don't have time for that. We gotta cut this tree down. Right? And then the moral is like, well, if you actually stop to sharpen the saw, like, your cutting of the tree would be so much faster. Yet people don't take the time to, learn a little bit about your, how to work better and smarter instead of harder. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, so I would say the trick for anybody using AutoHotkey that wants to convince their company to use it.
Yeah.
Demo something simple.
Yeah.
Talk about the financial savings a lot.
Yeah. Maybe throw in there explaining it's not going to break it, right? Like you said. I mean, that question will come up, and push the thing that this is only doing what a user can do, nothing more, nothing less.
And you know, but really drive home the error reduction and the less people needed to do a job.
Yeah. Or well, for me, it was always, I can do, like, actually one thing, I'd have to upload email lists to our email client, and that would take 7 minutes for me manually to log into the tool, manually click through each button, load the next page, load the next page, load the next page. And then I didn't know about APIs at the time, so I automated the web scraping side of things to automate that process. And I got it down to, I think it was like a minute and a half or somewhere in I forget how long. It was much, much shorter. And I said, now I can, you know, I hit a button, I'm not even doing it, but it's even shorter because it's the web page is reacting to when it's available, you know, and I'm not manually doing it. But then when I learned about APIs, I got it down to less than 30 seconds, and it was still, I hit the button, and then it was all done behind the scenes. And it was done, you know, far more accurately than not picking the wrong things. And anyway, yeah, it was. And I did it from a SharePoint site where I would scrape the page, so I would automate getting the names of the things and then building the name of my list and grabbing the right file and the whole process. It was awesome. And then I left, and then they just stopped using it because someone changed the web page, right? They changed, it was a SharePoint, they changed it, then it didn't work. And they asked me to fix it. I'm like, you know, that's not my job, you know, but I thought they would get someone else to fix it, and they just stopped using it entirely. And I didn't learn about that until quite a while later. But I'm like, you know, I would have fixed it if you, like it said, we're going to throw it away and go back to manually doing this process. But anyway, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's not known. It's just not. You've got to really sell automation in general to get them to pick it up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's. You did the critical first step. You demoed it,
yeah.
But you never sold them on cost savings.
Yeah. Well, and what was interesting in hindsight too was they said they asked around and that nobody knew AutoHotkey. I'm like, well, did you look at the code? Did you ask them to look at the code? Because I'm like, I think any programmer, if you looked at my code, you could have saw, like, if you knew anything about JavaScript or anything, you know, like, oh, this was connected to this thing and now it's not that. I mean, I could have, even without knowing anything, probably could have figured out like how to update it. And yet I think they just said, do you know AutoHotkey? Thinking that was a determining factor when it wasn't at all, right? If you look at the code, because I'm sure like you, I'll look at any code of any programming language. If I have it and I'm like, I can hack it, like I'll look at it, and more than often you can tweak it, right? You can tweak whatever and update it a little. I can't change its total functionality, but if something breaks and it was using and I know what it was before, I can tweak it and adjust it and probably at least 70% of the time get it back to working, right?
Yeah.
Or with a little Google searching.
That's about where I'm at with Java. I can do a little new stuff and a lot of manipulation.
Yeah. I have a buddy of mine that he's programmed in Java for like 20 years or 25 years, somewhere in there. So if you ever get stuck on something, I can connect you if you're interested. He is flat out. I
don't like Java, and I don't do a lot of Java.
Yeah.
So I avoid it like the plague.
Yeah. I don't blame you. I look at some other languages like C# and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I told you, like, I know I'm not a programmer, but I know I don't want to be a programmer. I don't want to sit and just code all day. I like the fact I can get stuff done so much faster. The fact that I'm coding, like, I could care less, right? I like the problem solving. Don't get me wrong, right? That's the fun part, but I don't want to just sit in front of a GUI or editor and code all day. That's definitely not my thing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
No. I think we've covered what I think are most of the important points. You know, the benefits and what you have to sell automation.
Yeah.
And it is a sales pitch. Never forget that. And
your dog agrees.
That's it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
See you around.